Alright, and this is going to be part 3, directly taken off from where part 2 was, so, here we go. Szeth turned and continued on his way, slippered feet falling on the soft red rug. The shard blade, as always, glistened silver and clean. When one killed with a blade, there was no blood. It seemed like a sign. The shard blade was just a tool. It could not be blamed for the murders. The door at the end of the hallway burst open. Szeth froze as a small group of soldiers rushed out, ushering a man in regal robes, his head ducked as if to avoid arrows. The soldiers wore deep blue, the color of the king's guard, and the corpses didn't make them stop and gawk. They were prepared for what a shard-bearer could do. They opened a side door and shoved their ward through, several leveling spears at Szeth as they backed out. Another figure stepped from the king's quarters. He wore glistening blue armor made of smoothly interlocking plates. Unlike common plate armor, however, this armor had no leather or mail visible at the joints, just smaller plates fitting together with intricate precision. The armor was beautiful, the blue inlaid with golden bands around the edges of each piece of plate. The helm ornamented with 3 waves of small, horn-like wings. Shard plate, the customary complement to a shard blade. The newcomer carried a sword as well, an enormous shard blade 6 feet long with a design along the blade like burning flames. A weapon of silvery metal that gleamed and almost seemed to glow. A weapon designed to slay dark gods, a larger counterpart to the one Szeth carried. Szeth hesitated. He didn't recognize the armor. He had not been warned that he would be set at this task, and hadn't been given proper time to memorize the various suits of plate or blades owned by the Alethi. But a shard-bearer would have to be dealt with before he chased the king. He could not leave such a foe behind. Besides, perhaps a shard-bearer could defeat him, kill him, and end his miserable life. His lashings wouldn't work directly on someone in shard plate, and the armor would enhance the man, strengthen him. Szeth's honor would not allow him to betray his mission or seek death. But if that death occurred, he would welcome it. The shard-bearer struck, and Szeth lashed himself to the side of the hallway, leaping with a twist and landing on the wall. He danced backward, blade held at the ready. The shard-bearer fell into an aggressive posture, using one of the swordplay stances favored here in the east. He moved far more nimbly than one would expect for a man in such bulky armor. Shard plate was special, as ancient and magical as the blades it complemented. The shard-bearer struck. Szeth skipped to the side and lashed himself to the ceiling as the shard-bearer's blade sliced into the wall. Feeling a thrill at the contest, Szeth dashed forward and attacked downward with an overhand blow, trying to hit the shard-bearer's helm. The man ducked, going down on one knee, letting Szeth's blade cleave empty air. Szeth leaped backward as the shard-bearer swung upward with his blade, slicing into the ceiling. Szeth didn't own a set of plate himself, and didn't care to. His lashings interfered with the gemstones that powered shard plate, and he had to choose one or the other. As the shard-bearer turned, Szeth sprinted forward across the ceiling. As expected, the shard-bearer swung again, and Szeth leaped to the side, rolling. He came up from his roll and flipped, lashing himself to the floor again. He spun to land on the ground beside the shard-bearer. He slammed his blade into his opponent's open back. Unfortunately, there was one major advantage plate offered. It could block a shard blade. Szeth's weapon hit solidly, causing a web of glowing lines to spread out across the back of the armor, and stormlight began to leak free from them. Shard plate didn't dent or bend like common metal. Szeth would have to hit the shard-bearer in the same location at least once more to break through. Szeth danced out of range as the shard-bearer swung in anger, trying to cut at Szeth's knees. The tempest within Szeth gave him many advantages, including the ability to recover quickly from small wounds. But it would not restore limbs killed by a shard blade. He rounded the shard-bearer, then picked a moment and dashed forward. The shard-bearer swung again, but Szeth briefly lashed himself to the ceiling for lift. He shot into the air, cresting over the swing, then immediately lashed himself back to the floor. He struck as he landed, but the shard-bearer recovered quickly and executed a perfect follow-through stroke, coming within a finger of hitting Szeth. The man was dangerously skilled with that blade. Many shard-bearers depended too much on the power of their weapon and armor. This man was different. Szeth jumped to the wall and struck at the shard-bearer with quick, terse attacks, like a snapping eel. The shard-bearer fended him off with wide, sweeping counters. His blade's length kept Szeth at bay. "This is taking too long," Szeth thought. If the king slipped away into hiding, Szeth would fail in his mission no matter how many people he killed. He ducked in for another strike, but the shard-bearer forced him back. Each second this fight lasted was another for the king's escape. It was time to be reckless. Szeth launched into the air, lashing himself to the other end of the hallway and falling feet first toward his adversary. The shard-bearer didn't hesitate to swing, but Szeth lashed himself down at an angle, dropping immediately. The shard blade swished through the air above him. He landed in a crouch, using his momentum to throw himself forward, and swung at the shard-bearer's side, where the plate had cracked. He hit with a powerful blow. That piece of the plate shattered, bits of molten metal streaking away. The shard-bearer grunted, dropping to one knee, raising a hand to his side. Szeth raised a foot to the man's side and shoved him backward with a Stormlight-enhanced kick. The heavy shard-bearer crashed into the door of the king's quarters, smashing it and falling part way into the room beyond. Szeth left him, ducking instead through the doorway to the right, following the way the king had gone. The hallway here had the same red carpet, and the stormlight lamps on the walls gave Szeth a chance to recharge the tempest within. Energy blazed within him again, and he sped up. If he could get far enough ahead, he could deal with the king, then turn back to fight off the shard-bearer. It wouldn't be easy. A full lashing on a doorway wouldn't stop a shard-bearer, and that plate would let the man run supernaturally fast. Szeth glanced over his shoulder. The shard-bearer wasn't following. The man sat up in his armor, looking dazed. Szeth could just barely see him, sitting in the doorway, surrounded by broken bits of wood. Perhaps Szeth had wounded him more than he'd thought. Or maybe... Szeth froze. He thought of the ducked head of the man who'd been rushed out, face obscured. The shard-bearer still wasn't following. He was so skilled. It was said that few men could rival Gavilar Kholin swordsmanship. Could it be? Szeth turned and dashed back, trusting his instincts. As soon as the shard-bearer saw him, he climbed to his feet with alacrity. Szeth ran faster. What was the safest place for your king? In the hands of some guards fleeing, or protected in a suit of shard plate left behind, dismissed as a bodyguard? Clever, Szeth thought as the formerly sluggish shard-bearer fell into another battle stance. Szeth attacked with renewed vigor, swinging his blade in a flurry of strikes. The shard-bearer, the king, aggressively struck out with broad, sweeping blows. Szeth pulled away from one of these, feeling the wind of the weapon passing just inches before him. He timed his next move, then dashed forward, ducking underneath the king's follow-through. The king, expecting another strike at his side, twisted with his arm held protectively to block the hole in his plate. That gave Szeth the room to run past him and into the king's chambers. The king spun around to follow, but Szeth ran through the lavishly furnished chamber, flinging out his hand, touching pieces of furniture he passed. He infused them with stormlight, lashing them to a point behind the king. The furniture tumbled as if the room had been turned on its side, couches, chairs, and tables dropping toward the surprised king. Gavilar made the mistake of chopping at them with his shard blade. The weapon easily sheared through a large couch, but the pieces still crashed into him, making him stumble. A footstool hit him next, throwing him to the ground. Gavilar rolled out of the way of the furniture and charged forward, plate leaking streams of light from the cracked sections. Szeth gathered himself, then leaped into the air, lashing himself backward and to the right as the king arrived. He zipped out of the way of the king's blow, then lashed himself forward with 2 basic lashings in a row. Stormlight flashed out of him, clothing freezing as he was pulled toward the king at twice the speed of a normal fall. The king's posture indicated surprise as Szeth lurched in midair, then spun toward him, swinging. He slammed his blade into the king's helm, then immediately lashed himself to the ceiling and fell upward, slamming into the stone roof above. He'd lashed himself in too many directions too quickly, and his body had lost track, making it difficult to land gracefully. He stumbled back to his feet. Below, the king stepped back, trying to get into position to swing up at Szeth. The man's helm was cracked, leaking stormlight, and he stood protectively, defending the side with the broken plate. The king used a one-handed swing, reaching for the ceiling. Szeth immediately lashed himself downward, judging that the king's attack would leave him unable to get his sword back in time. Szeth underestimated his opponent. The king stepped into Szeth's attack, trusting his helm to absorb the blow. Just as Szeth hit the helm a second time, shattering it, Gavilar punched with his offhand, slamming his gauntleted fist in Szeth's face. Blinding light flashed in Szeth's eyes, a counterpoint to the sudden agony that crashed across his face. Everything blurred, his vision fading. Pain. So much pain! He screamed, stormlight leaving him in a rush, and he slammed back into something hard. The balcony doors. More pain broke out across his shoulders as if someone had stabbed him with 100 daggers, and he hit the ground and rolled to a stop, muscles trembling. The blow would have killed an ordinary man. Alright guys, we're on to the final part. It's going to be part 4. Not too much left at all, so hope you guys are still with me. And there you go, final part. Here we go.